So you've been hearing a lot about how IIIF involves community. And so I'm going to speak a bit about some of the activities that we have going on in the community and how you can get involved if you're interested. And again, I'm Sheila Rabun. I am the IIIF Community and Communications Officer for the IIIF Consortium. So our community landscape, this is just an artist's rendition of what the community looks like to me, maybe. So you'll see we have the IIIF Consortium, we have community groups, technical specification groups. Our community includes vendors and software firms, and we have our institutional adopters. So that's kind of the full picture of the landscape. Looking at the IIIF Consortium, if you want to know more, this URL that I have up here is the best place to go. We currently have 41 institutional members in the IIIF Consortium, and these are institutions that are interested in contributing to providing sustainability and steering for the initiative. And Tom mentioned earlier this morning, a lot of these institutions are national and state libraries, university libraries, research institutions, and we're starting to see more museums becoming interested. And so through the consortium, the agreement when joining the consortium outlines an organizational structure. So we have an executive committee that's comprised of representatives from the core founding institutions of IIIF, the first institutions that came together to start working together in a really formal way to create the specifications and bring the use cases together. We also have a coordinating committee, so these are some of the more active leaders in the community that are working on a more regular basis and kind of the more day-to-day and week-to-week direction of the community. And then we have the editorial group, and this is a group of community participants who have actually written the IIIF API specifications. And we are, of course, always accepting new members to join the consortium. We're accepting additional founding members through the end of 2017. And then we'll continue to accept new members after that, but they would not necessarily be considered founding members. So we're basically in our second year of having the consortium. And so we would like to, grow and continue to move forward with that. Our community groups, so IIIF, the community is bigger than the consortium. We have, as Tom pointed out, almost 700 people on our IIIF Discuss email list, and of course many others joining in on a lot of the community discussions. If you're interested in learning more about the community groups, if you go to our IIIF.io website, there's a community tab and there's information about the groups there. These are interest-based discussion groups. They also undertake activities that are identified as being useful for the community. So these groups involve representatives from various institutions that are involved with IIIF or looking into IIIF, but also scholars and researchers, anyone who might be considered an end user, curators, librarians, basically anyone who's interested in IIIF along with any of the topics of the groups. So the first group that was formed was manuscripts, specific interest group. So they meet once a month and they talk about new things that are happening, what people are doing with manuscripts and IIIF, and how the functionality that IIIF provides can help with manuscripts research and making manuscripts available. There's also a newspapers group, And so that's a bit different from manuscripts in that there is quite a bit of text in newspapers, and so we're starting to see more discussion and activity about best practices with IIIF and dealing with text and OCR data, which are represented as annotations in IIIF. There's also a museums community group, so we've picked up quite a bit of interest from across the museums community, and so they have monthly calls just to kind of touch base and see who's doing what in the museums community with IIIF. There's a lot of benefits for exhibits and digital asset management with digital museum images and IIIF. So if you have an interest there, this group is a good place to go to find out who else is involved. And if you have questions, these are great groups to go and ask. And then we also have a software developers community group. So these are software developers either working at an institution that's using IIIF or vendors or software firms, just anyone who is working on actually implementing the technical details of IIIF. And so there's a lot of best practices shared and questions can be answered. So that kind of covers a little bit more of a technical focus for actually implementing IIIF in software. So all of these groups have a regular call schedule that you can find on the URL that is here on our website. And then in addition, we also have the IIIF technical specification groups. So we talked earlier this morning about the four primary existing IIIF APIs, the image, presentation, search, and authentication APIs. And so as needs and new use cases arise within the community, we're continuing to work on expanding the technical specifications. And we do this through a community process that involves regular group calls, communications across our email list, and communication on our Slack instant messaging team. So right now we have a IIIF AV, or audiovisual group. This group is working to essentially expand the presentation API to include a time dimension. So imagine having interoperability for audio and or visual resources and being able to maybe compare videos or audio clips or something like that. So we're working towards figuring out the technical details of how that would work, and so that's work in progress. We also have a IIIF discovery group. We're working on figuring out the best ways to make IIIF resources more discoverable, both for machines and human end users. And you'll hear a little bit both about the AV group and the discovery group a little bit later. You'll get a more in-depth look at that. And then we also have a brand new group that's just starting. We have a community process for forming new groups based on interest across the community. So we're going to start looking at, like I said, more text-based topics in terms of IIIF. So with our annotations, looking at specifying levels of granularity. For example, a word, a phrase, a sentence, a paragraph, there are different levels of granularity there. So we're just getting started looking into that. And as I mentioned, new use cases are considered as IIIF evolves, and we do a lot of our tracking of use cases through GitHub and IIIF stories. So if you just do a Google search for IIIF GitHub, you'll come across a lot of really good material. And as I mentioned, vendors and software firms and institutional adopters are all major parts of this community. It's kind of a strong ecosystem where we rely on each other to continue to move IIIF forward. And I put a screenshot here of our list of participating institutions, and you can see, well, maybe you can see, we have vendors, we have software firms, and in addition to institutions. So basically, anyone who's interested in interoperability for digital images is welcome to get involved with the community. You don't have to be a library or a specific type of institution, for example. And this is just an overview of some of the both commercial and open source software communities that are working with IIIF. And so you might see some that you recognize. Communication channels, as I mentioned, we have our website. If you go to iiif.io/community, you'll see a whole list of ways to get involved. We have our bi-weekly community calls. All of the different community groups and technical groups have regular calls. Our IIIF Discuss email list is a Google group that anyone can sign up for. As I mentioned, we have our instant messaging through Slack. Everyone also knows about Twitter and the IIIF hashtag, and our IIIF GitHub page. And I just wanted to highlight also, we have, through the GitHub page, you can find our awesome IIIF list. And that's where, as a community, when we see really good examples of documentation or just really anything that would be helpful as a resource to anyone who's new or part of the community, we try to add it to that awesome list. So that's a good resource for learning more. We've started a IIIF community newsletter that can be found online in the news tab. It comes out quarterly, and that's a great way to just see at a glance what is going on within the community. And we've got our annual in-person events. So this is our annual conference, and then we generally have a smaller working meeting in the fall where a lot of our groups can get together face-to-face and make progress there. And of course, you can always email me. This is my email address, srabun@iiif.io. I also have some business cards out on the table in case you want to just get in touch with me directly. So if you remember anything from this presentation, the first 3 steps for getting involved, especially if you're new to the community, step 1, I would say, would be to attend an event, which you're doing right now. So that step is done. Step 2, I would say joining the IIIF Discuss email list. I send a lot of announcements. The newsletter goes out on that list. It's a great place to ask questions. And like I said, if you just Google IIIF Discuss email list, you'll find it, and you can sign up there. And then finally, again, the website, the community page, has a whole list of ways to get involved. So that is a bit of an overview of some of the community aspects and how to get involved. And next, we are going to hear from some representatives from the Vatican Library in a case study of how they're using IIIF.